Welcome to Let the Qur'an Speak. I'm Aisha, your host. In today's episode, we'll sit down with Dr. Shabir Ally to get his thoughts on the book Structure and Quranic Interpretation, a study of symmetry and coherence in Islam's holy text by Raymond Farrin. This book aims to provide a study of the Qur'an through literary analysis, highlighting how all of the chapters and verses in the Qur'an are linked to larger contextual messages in the Qur'an. Let's hear how this book fares in Dr. Shabir's eyes. Welcome to the show, Dr. Shabir.
Pleasure to be on.
So we're on our book review segment, and I know you reviewed a book today focusing on the Qur'an, structure and Quranic interpretation. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I have a copy of that book. It's by Raymond Farrin, who teaches, he's an associate professor of Arabic at the American University of Kuwait.
Cool.
Raymond Farrin. His book is entitled Structure and Quranic Interpretation, a study of symmetry and coherence in Islam's holy text. To me, this is a groundbreaking work. It's a very important book, and I wish that it would be translated into Arabic so that Arabic scholars would also have an opportunity to look at the Quran from this particular angle. It is a very new angle on the Quran, actually one that has been developing for some time through the work of many scholars to whom Raymond Farrin has referred to in his book. But he has now brought that work to a culmination that allows us to see the beauty and harmony of the structure of the Quran as a whole.
So you mentioned he takes a new angle. What is that new angle, and how does he position this book to make it groundbreaking? And I know you're a critical thinker, so it's the fact that you said it's groundbreaking is intriguing. So go ahead.
So among Muslim scholars over time, some have wondered about the arrangement of things within the Quran. Why does one chapter get placed before or after another one, for example? And very little has been said about this in classical Islamic history. In about the 15th century, we have a scholar by the name of Al-Biqai in Egypt who did a lot more on this, and so too did Imam Jalaluddin as-Suyuti. But still, those were rudimentary explorations into this whole idea of how things are structured within the Quran. In the massive commentary of Imam al-Razi, he sometimes, and very often actually, looks at the links between verses of the Quran. So you have, in very classical times, in the tafsir of at-Tabari, there is hardly any discussion about, okay, so we're dealing with a verse now. How does this relate to the verses that came before it, or that will come after it? There's little discussion about that. Usually the verses are dealt with one at a time, and one just moves on.
And individually, right?
Individually, to the extent that some have referred to this as a kind of atomistic tafsir or commentary on the Quran. But to see the Quran on this grand scale of how things relate to each other from within the book, this has been done very little throughout Islamic history. In modern times, I mean, Ahsan Islahi has become famous for his thinking about the Quran. The Arabic word for it is tadabbur, contemplation on the Quran. And he mentioned that the Quranic chapters usually come in pairs. And that work was taken further by Mustahsin Mir in his book Coherence on the Quran. But some non-Muslim scholars continued the work as well. There's a French scholar, Michael Kuipers, who is cited a lot by Raymond Farrin in this book, and now Raymond Farrin himself taking the work to this stage of culmination.
Now, what are some, you mentioned, the two chapters that are linked. What are some of the bigger theories that he argues in his book in terms of how the Quran is organized?
Well, what is most particular about Raymond Farrin's input here is the idea of ring composition. There are some classical works which have been composed along similar lines. And this has been discussed by other scholars with reference to the other works. So in ring composition, what is understood, you know how if you're going to write an essay for a university, it is stressed that your essay must have a beginning, a body, and an end, introduction and conclusion. And your conclusion must somehow reflect back to the introduction, so that when the reader reaches the conclusion, the reader gets the sense that we're back in a way, like we haven't forgotten where we began.
Like a full circle.
It's a full circle. So now that forms a sort of a ring. But more than this, in the idea of ring composition, the meaning is found in the middle. So somewhere in the middle, this meaning is developed and it is most pronounced. And what is found is that in the Quran, often this is the structure of the individual chapter. So what Raymond Farrin has shown is that you may have three basic situations. One is the latter half of the Quranic chapter will reflect the previous half, but in the same order as the previous half. So let's say we divide
that particular chapter?
That particular chapter.
Okay.
So let's say we divide a chapter into 4 sections. So we have A, B for the first 2 sections, and then the A and B will repeat again. Or you might say A complement, B complement, so in the same order. But then you may have a reverse of that order, a chiastic sort of arrangement where you have, for example, A, B, and then B complement,
and
A
then
complement.
Okay.
So the 2 A's are at the end and the 2 B's are in the middle. And then further from this, you can have the concentric approach, which is the whole idea of ring composition, where you have a C in the middle that balances the whole thing, or that serves as the pivot for the rest. So you have A, B, C, and then B complement, A complement. So starting at the ends, you have the A's, going in, you have the B's, and then right in the middle, you have the C. Now this, of course, means that there are 5 sections, but you can have as many as 10 sections or
So is this what he's saying occurs throughout the Quran in all of the chapters?
What is so interesting is that, and this is the beauty and harmony of it, is that he analyzes the chapters, and yes, he shows that if the chapter is very long, you will find that there will be a ring within the ring. So whereas the chapter as a whole has this overall ring composition to it, so if you take one half of the chapter, you'll find that there is a ring within that half of the chapter itself, and sometimes a ring within the ring within the ring, which is quite amazing, because it would mean that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, over a period of 23 years, he goes about, people ask him questions, he replies. The question and the reply are both mentioned in the Quran often. For him to keep track on how this all will flow together to get this kind of ring composition, this is really remarkable. But this happens within each chapter. And then you ask about the whole Quran. He shows that, in fact, when we look at like from the chapter level, now coming from outside of the chapter, you'll find the chapters are paired together. And then pairs of chapters link with other pairs to form larger groups. And then those groups themselves, he has grouped the entire Quran into 19 groups of chapters. With an introductory chapter and then 2 prayers at the end, the introductory chapter itself being a prayer, and then 2 prayer chapters at the end, the 113th, 114th chapter. And then in between you have 19 groups of chapters. And then these 19 groups are so arranged that you have one in the middle, leaving 18, which are so balanced that there are 9 and 9. And the second group of 9 actually are just like we described with the A and the A complement. So starting at the ends, you can see that the first and the 19th group mirror each other, the second and the 18th group mirror each other, the third and the 17th group, and so on, all the way until you narrow down into the central group, which is the 10th group.
Is it, so definitely very interesting and has piqued my interest as well. So when you're reading the book, is it easy to understand? Because I mean, if you think about it, it is a bit complicated, you know, when you're trying to explain it. So does it come out clear in the book?
Oh, definitely, yes, very clear. One would need to get a copy of the Quran to work with side by side with the book, because the book will refer to a chapter number. And you may want to go into that chapter itself and read it for yourself and see how things play out within the chapter. I mean, that's for somebody who wants to go into it in more detail. But if you want to just read the book for enjoyment, like as a bedtime reading, that too is possible, because though the work is quite scholarly in its nature, and in terms of the theme and content, the author has done well to keep it as a popular reading. relegating much of the technical detail to the footnotes. So those who want to study it at a scholarly level, they know where to turn.
So Dr. Shabir, any area that you think the book, or that you would critique the book on, that needs improvement?
Well, one of the things that I found very interesting is that he in order to make his structure work to his complete satisfaction, he felt it necessary to say that the first chapter of the Quran should have only 6 verses, not by omitting any words, but what he's done here is that he wouldn't consider the basmala, the opening invocation, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of God, the Beneficent, the Merciful One. He would not consider that to be a verse of the Quran, which by itself is not a problem, because there are Muslim scholars in the past who have actually debated this issue. Some say it's a verse of that particular surah. Some say it is a verse of the Quran, but not linked to any particular chapter. And some say that it is a verse in this particular chapter, and elsewhere it is just written at the head of the chapters, but not counted as a verse. So you have this kind of variety of interpretations. But as far as I know, everyone agrees that Surah Al-Fatiha, the first chapter of the Quran, whether you include the Basmala in the counting or not, you still have 7 verses. Because if you include the Basmala, then you have Surat al-Ladhina an'amta alayhim and the rest all count as 1 verse. But if you exclude the Basmala, then you break in between. You say Surat al-Ladhina an'amta alayhim, and then another verse starts with Ghayr al-Maghdubi alayhim, and then ends with Wala ad-Dallin. So you still have 7. But he wants to make them 6. And one of the reasons he wants to make them 6 is that he wants the first chapter to balance with the last chapter of the Quran. And the last chapter is 6 verses.
So to match them
Yeah,
up.
so he wants to have this kind of so mathematical precision when we're dealing with this structure. But I would say that you don't need this kind of mathematical precision. You just need to see that the overall structure actually works, even in an approximate way, because after all, it does require some interpretation. This does not just jump out at you, otherwise it wouldn't take 1,400 years of scholarship to arrive at the level to which he has arisen now. He has done a great job, but sometimes the work that one is doing can get to one's head. It's like, the batter, hitting well, and then he stops to admire the shot. He shouldn't stop to admire the shot.
Yeah.
He should run, right? Because that was the whole purpose of it. So in this case, like if one starts admiring one's own baby here, and then become preoccupied with it, one forgets
you lose
what.
track.
So his purpose was to show that the Quran as it is has a structure, not to meddle with the Quran as it is, and to make it conform to some idea of what the structure should be. And of course, in a previous show, we have shown that the number of verses of Surah Al-Fatiha being 7 does actually conform to mathematical patterns. And there is a reason why it is 7 and not some other number. So we shouldn't try to change it to some other number.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.